And welcome back to the CBS Bay Area Spelling Bee. You ready for more
I have
spelling?
trouble with that myself. We are ready for round two. Let's go back to KCBS Radio's Stan Bunker. Stan?
Thanks, Brian. Sharon, 44 spellers started, 44 still in as we begin round two. The first word of the round is rhinoceros. The videotape showed dramatic footage of a rhinoceros charging a photographer. Rhinoceros.
Rhinoceros. R-H-I-N-O-C-E-R-O-S. Rhinoceros.
This word has a homonym. The word is foliate, an adjective that means shaped like a leaf. The chairs in the dining room had foliate designs carved on their legs. Foliate.
Foliate. F-O-L-I-A-T-E. Foliate.
Geisha. The geisha entertained her client with music and dance. Geisha.
Can I have the definition, please?
A Japanese girl who is trained to provide entertaining and lighthearted company as for a man or a group of men.
Geisha. G-E-I-S-H-A. Geisha.
Hacienda. A winding tree-lined driveway led to the hacienda. Hacienda.
Hacienda. May I have the definition?
The main building of a farm or ranch.
Hacienda. H-A-C-I-E-N-D-A. Hacienda.
Satori. The primary method of achieving satori is through the use of riddles that provide material for meditation. Satori.
Can you give me the definition?
Sudden enlightenment and a state of consciousness attained by intuitive illumination representing the spiritual goal of Zen Buddhism.
Can you repeat the word?
Satori.
Satori. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Satori.
Satori. S-A-T-O-R-I.
Gregarious. Because of their gregarious nature, dogs make good house pets. Gregarious.
Gregarious. G-R-E-G-A-R-I-O-U-S-N-E-S-S. Gregariousness.
Suave. Jose has a suave way of treating his guests. Suave.
May I have the definition?
Smoothly affable or polite, though often without deep interest or sincerity.
Suave. S-U-A-V-E. Suave.
Argentine. The Argentine and his partner showed the dance class how the tango should be performed. Argentine.
May I please have the definition?
A native or inhabitant of Argentina.
What's the part of speech?
It's a noun.
Argentine. A-R-G-E-N-T-I-N-E. Argentine.
Triumvirate. The responsibility for making schools safe belongs to a triumvirate. Teachers, administrators, and parents. Triumvirate.
May I please have the definition?
A group, party, or association of three.
Triumvirate. T-R-I-U-M-V-I-R-A-T-E. Triumvirate.
Duenna. The governor's daughter was never allowed to leave the house without her duenna. Duenna.
Can I have the language of origin?
It's from a word that went from Latin to Spanish.
What's the part of speech?
It's a noun.
Duenna. D-O
D-U-E-N-N-A. Duenna.
Homburg. A villain in the movie wore a dark suit and a black Homburg. Homburg. Let me, before you start, it has a near homonym. This word is a noun. It means a man's hat of smooth finished felt with stiff curled ribbon bound brim and a high tapered crown creased lengthwise. Homburg.
Could you repeat the word, please?
Homburg.
Can I get a language of origin?
It's from an originally German word.
Okay. Hamburg. H-O-M-B-U-R-G. Hamburg. Oh, okay.
This word has a near homonym as well. Junta. It's a noun that means a closely knit group of persons composing or dominating a government, especially after a revolutionary seizure of power. The military junta set up its headquarters in the former presidential palace. Junta.
Junta. May I have the definition, please? Again.
A closely knit group of persons composing or dominating a government, especially after a revolutionary seizure of power.
May I have the origin, please?
It's from a word that went from Latin to Spanish.
Junta. J-U-N-T-A. Junta.
Imam. The imam at the local Islamic center teaches classes on the Quran to teenagers. Imam.
Imam. May I have the definition, please?
The prayer leader of a mosque.
Can I have the language of origin?
It's from Arabic.
Imam. I-M-A-M. Imam.
Pitchblende. A German chemist discovered uranium in pitchblende in 1789. Pitchblende.
Pitchblende. P-I-T-C-H-B-L-E-N-D-E. Pitchblende.
Antipasto. Felicia's favorite antipasto is fried mozzarella. Antipasto.
Antipasto. A-N-T-I-P-A-S-T-O. Antipasto.
Knish. Saul searched his new neighborhood in vain for a restaurant that served a decent knish. Knish.
Can I have the language of origin, please?
It's from a word that went from Russian to Yiddish.
Knish. Can I have the definition?
It's a round or square of rich baking powder dough folded over a savory meat or cheese filling and baked or fried.
Knish. K-N-I-S-H. Knish.
Machismo. The Olympic boxer raised his fist to the crowd in a display of machismo. Machismo.
Machismo. May I have the definition?
A strong sense of masculine pride and exaggerated masculinity.
Machismo. M-A-C-H-I-S-M-O. Machismo.
Meistersinger. Mr. Heinz can trace his family tree back to a Bavarian Meistersinger born in 1498. Meistersinger.
Meistersinger. M-I-E-S-T-E-R-S-I-N-G-E-R.
Cilantro. In Janet's opinion, the best part of the fresh salsa was the chopped cilantro. Cilantro.
May I have the definition, please?
Leaves of coriander used as a flavoring or garnish.
Cilantro. C-I-L-A-N-T-R-O. Cilantro.
Finesse. Wayne plays baseball with a finesse that only players who have natural ability demonstrate. Finesse.
What's the definition?
Delicate skill, exquisite grace.
What's the language of origin?
It's from a French word.
Finesse. Are there any alternate pronunciations?
No.
Finesse. F-I-N-E-S-S-E. Finesse.
Incriminate. Worried that the defendant's statement would incriminate him, the defense attorney begged him to plead the Fifth Amendment. Incriminate.
May I have the definition?
To furnish evidence or proof of circumstances tending to show the guilt of.
May I have the language of origin?
It's from Latin.
Incriminate. I-N-C-R-I-M-I-N-A-T-E. Incriminate.
Didactic. Most of the younger children did not seem to pick up on the didactic aspect of the parables. Didactic.
Can I have the language of origin, please?
It's from Greek.
Didactic. Am I pronouncing this correctly?
Didactic.
Didactic. D-I-D-A-C-T-I-C. Didactic.
Egalitarian. The senator promised to help create and expand opportunities and distribute them in an egalitarian fashion. Egalitarian.
May I have the definition, please?
Marked by or adhering to a belief that all persons are equal in intrinsic worth and are entitled to equal access to the rights and privileges of their society.
Egalitarian. E-G-A-L-I-T-A-R-I-A-N. Egalitarian.
This word has a near homonym. Muslin, a noun meaning a plain woven cotton fabric that is used bleached or unbleached for sheeting, embroidery, or other purposes. The simple look of tab curtains made of unbleached muslin is perfect for Barbara's den. Muslin.
May I have the language of origin, please?
It's from an Iraqi geographical name that went into Arabic, then Italian, and then French.
Muslin. Am I saying it correctly?
Say it again, please.
Muslin.
Yes, muslin.
M-U-S-L-I-N. Muslin.
Capitulation. The capitulation took place on the battlefield at noon. Capitulation.
May I have the definition, please?
The act or agreement of one that surrenders to an enemy upon stipulated terms.
Could you please repeat the word?
Capitulation.
Capitulation. C-A-P-I-T-U-L-A-T-I-O-N. Capitulation.
Mystique. Climbing the 7 summits, which are composed of the highest mountain on each of the 7 continents, has a great mystique for alpinists.
Can I have the definition?
Mystique.
Can I
The
have
definition is a complex of transcendental or semi-mystical beliefs and attitudes directed toward an object as a person, institution, idea, or pursuit, and enhancing the significance of the object by enduring it with an esoteric truth or meaning.
Can you repeat the definition?
No.
Can you say the part of speech?
It's a noun.
And can you say the word again?
Mystique.
Can you use it in a sentence?
Climbing the 7 summits, which are composed of the highest mountain in each of the 7 continents, has a great mystique for alpinists.
Mystique. M-Y-S-T-I-C. Mystique.
This word has a near homonym, wanton. It's an adjective that means marked by or manifesting heedless disregard of justice or of the rights, safety, and feelings of others. The prosecutor maintained that the victim was attacked with wanton cruelty. Wanton.
Wanton. May I have the language of origin?
Originally English.
Wanton. W-A-N-T-O-N. Wanton.
Fastidious. Monique's fastidious attention to detail makes her an excellent copy editor. Fastidious.
Can you repeat the word again?
Fastidious.
What is the language of origin?
It is from Latin.
Fastidious. Festidious.
Pacifism. Many people support pacifism as an alternative to waging war. Pacifism.
Pacifism. Can I have the language of origin, please?
It came from French, which formed it from a Latin word.
Pacifism. Pacifism.
Swahili. Swahili was originally spoken in Zaire and is now a trade language in much of East Africa and the Congos. Swahili.
Can you repeat the word?
Swahili.
Swahili. Swahili. Swahili.
Bolivar. Drew recently added a ruble and a bolivar to his currency collection. Bolivar.
Language of origin.
It's from a South American name.
Beleevar.
Accommodate. Arthur insisted on staying in a hotel that would accommodate Paco, his elderly chihuahua. Accommodate.
Accommodate. ACCOMMODATE. Accommodate.
Herpetology. Jason studied herpetology to learn about the habits of cold-blooded creatures. Herpetology.
Herpetology. Am I pronouncing it correctly? Herpetology?
Herpetology.
Okay. May I please have the definition?
A branch of the science of animal life that deals with reptiles and amphibians.
Herpetology. HERPETOLOGY. Herpetology.
This word has a homonym. Kama, a noun meaning enjoyment of the world of the senses, constituting one of the goals of humans in Hinduism. Hinduism holds that kama is the lowest step on the ladder of aims in life. Kama.
Comma. Kama. Comma.
Lieutenant. At the end of the novel, the young infantry hero was finally promoted to lieutenant. Lieutenant.
Lieutenant. May I have the language of origin, please?
Originally Latin, it went through French before becoming English.
Lieutenant. LIEUTENANT. Lieutenant.
Borzoi. The borzoi resembles a large greyhound with long, wavy hair. Borzoi.
Can I have the language of origin, please?
It's from Russian.
Borzoi. BORZOI. Borzoi.
Beleaguer. In June, black flies often beleaguer campers and hikers. Beleaguer.
Beleaguer. May I have the definition?
To subject to oppressive or grievous forces to harass.
Beleaguer. May I have the origin?
It's from a Dutch word.
Beleaguer. BELEAGUER. Beleaguer.
Perfidy. Kate valued her friendship with Carol too much to let one perfidy destroy it.
Perfidy.
Perfidy.
Can I have the definition?
An act or instance of deception or betrayal.
Perfidy. Can I have the language of origin?
It's from Latin.
Perfidy. Are there any alternate pronunciations?
No.
Perfidy. P-E-R-F-I-D-Y. Perfidy.
Bachstein. Among the German cheeses, Bachstein is Helmut's favorite. Bachstein.
May I please have the part of speech?
It's a noun.
B-A-K-S-T-E-I-N.
Cordovan. Kathy's purse matches the cordovan of her penny loafers. Cordovan.
May I have the definition?
A variable color averaging a dark grayish red.
Can I have the language of origin?
From a Spanish geographical name.
Are there any alternate pronunciations?
No.
Cordovan. Cordovan. C-O-R-D-O-V-A-N. Cordovan.
Dressage. While in Austria, Derek attended an exhibition of dressage at a famous equestrian school. Dressage.
Dressage. D-R-E-S-S-A-G-E. Dressage.
Quinine. Quinine is commonly used to treat malaria. Quinine.
Can I have the language of origin?
It's from a word that went from Quechua to Spanish.
Quinine. Q-U-I-N-I-N-E.
Sortie. The mission of the sortie was to disable enemy air defenses. Sortie.
Can I have the definition?
One mission or attack by a single plane.
Can you please repeat the word?
Sortie.
Sortie. S-O-R-T-I-E. Sortie.
Azimuth. Using a compass, the navigator estimated the azimuth of the star. Azimuth.
Can I have the language of origin, please?
It's from Arabic.
Azimuth. A-Z-I-M-U-T-H. Azimuth.
And I believe that completes our round.
Okay, and at the end of round 2 here, we have 37 spellers left. So it was indeed a harder round. We're going to come back with round 3 after this short break.